Floyd Sweet. Recently, some additional information on Floyd Sweet's device has been released publicly by an associate of Floyd's who goes just by his first name of Maurice and who, having reached the age of 70, has decided that it is time to release this additional information. Maurice says, after observing the comments made over the past year regarding the Sweet VTA energy device, I decided to come out of the woodwork and explain what basically is not known regarding Floyd Sweet, Sparky, and his energy device. Keep in mind that I am 70 years old, quite computer illiterate, my background being mainly political science, graduate degree, consulting with state legislatures, mental health, former executive director of 5 clinics, and acquiring venture capital for high technical equipment, such as medical equipment, and various projects. My story is very unusual and strange, but, nevertheless true. At my age I have no one to impress with what I am about to tell you. My only interest is to correct error where possible and to make certain information known. Remember, that I have never had any education in electronics. This was a real advantage for me because I did not have any electrical principles which I had to unlearn in anything that Floyd told us. Unfortunately, one of my brothers who trained for 35 years in electronics was blown away when Floyd told him that he needed to reverse the concepts which he was taught about the action of an electron and treat it like it was positive. Therefore, for Sparky's modeling, electrons were flowing and acting in the opposite direction to what was normally modeled by a trained physicist. See what I mean? The dean of the School of Science of MIT that verified that Sparky had an MSEE degree and came third in his class of more than 200. Hopefully sincere researchers will be able to obtain some useful information in what I attempt to explain in the future that will help them to duplicate what Floyd had. In this respect, one day after Floyd had repeatedly asked me, "What is this device, Maurice?" and I repeatedly gave him the wrong answer, saying that it was an energy device, I finally realized that what was important to him was that he considered the device to be a time machine. His emphasis was not on the energy. He told me never to forget that the most important thing was that the device was a time machine. Maurice draws attention to the fact that Floyd Sweet graduated as an MSEE from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1969 and his thesis Dynamics of Magnetic Domains is considered by the MIT scientific community to be unparalleled in magnetic concepts. He received the coveted Dean's Award for his scientific research and his academic level in electrical engineering achievement ranks third in the history of the MIT School of Science. He has an extraordinary talent in the area of engineering mathematics, not to mention his concept of electromagnetic and related electrical phenomena and understanding of abstract intangibles needed to predict the unforeseen. Maurice says, in about 1988 John, who my 2 brothers and I were involved with in the high-tech field, realized that my brother, who was a doctor brother, was interested in negative energy devices for the treatment of the physical body, similar to Rife/Tesla frequency machines. John had formerly been employed at NASA with Floyd Sweet. John lived in California close to Floyd, Sherman Oaks. My doctor brother and I were introduced to Floyd by John, and we waited patiently for the time when we could see the VTA device. We saw it on the table at his house during various visits, but it was not operating. Floyd was like many inventors who played games with you. Each time we would drive 13 hours to see him thinking we could see the device operating, but he would have some excuse for not turning it on, or he would just ignore the purpose of our visit. On one visit, I looked over at Floyd and he was showing off his barium ferrite bar magnet. The magnet was approximately 1/2 thick, 7 long and 3 wide. He had a small piece of metal that was standing on the top of the magnet at a 45-degree angle. As I recall, he claimed that the 45-degree angle was needed in the treatment of the magnet so that it could capture scalar waves. The magnets were mainly functioning as a gate for the scalar waves. Additionally, if you placed a piece of thin flexible, ribbon-type, metal flat on the top of the magnet, the middle of the ribbon metal would be sucked down flat at the middle of the magnet and both ends of the ribbon metal would be bowed up at each end of the magnet. Also, I came to understand from another inventor that we introduced later on to Floyd that the figure 8 design, flux flow, on the top of the magnet played an important part in the functioning of the magnet. I don't really know about the concept and can't relay any additional information. On another visit, Floyd demonstrated the flowing flux of the magnet. He had a TV monitor and he would place the magnet by the screen and you could see all the beautiful colors of the flux as it moved across the monitor screen. My electronics brother told me that Floyd had told him that he had a way of treating the magnet by calibrating the scalar wave angle coming in using the TV monitor. A side note is that Floyd delighted in telling people, when they asked how he treated his magnets, they should get the magnets real hot first. This apparently screwed up the magnetism and he enjoyed doing this for some weird reason. Finally, after 12 trips across the California desert, Floyd agreed to show us the device in operation. In his defense, Floyd did claim that on some earlier planned demonstrations that his magnets had been pulverized by artificial earthquakes coming up through Mexico. He designed some type of buffer in the device that eliminated the problem, but it was an ongoing problem for quite a period of time. This reminds me now that I must digress because I need to tell you about the government, or WHO, involvement with us. When we first started to visit Floyd, our phones were all tapped, I do not know by whom. My electronics brother worked full-time with the Air National Guard and his specialty was electronic security, crypto, etc. tied in with SAC bases in our area and the surrounding states. Additionally, he had set up the clean room for the President of the United States when he visited our state. I mention this because even my electronics brother was doubtful in the beginning that we were all being monitored. On one occasion, my doctor brother had his complete prior telephone conversation played back to him when he answered the phone. 20 minutes later, I think it was probably some type of screw-up by whoever was monitoring our phones. My biggest complaint was the consistent early morning 3 a.m. call and then a hang-up when you answered, for what reason I don't know other than for harassment purposes. I give you the above information so that you can understand the seriousness of what we were involved with. Floyd's energy device was mainly three things. 1. It was a healing device, negative electricity, negative time. In theory, you could reset the template in your DNA with this energy source and therefore cleanse the body of all impurities that your ancestors had acquired over time. Additionally, you could kill current disease, virus/bacteria, in the body by using the right frequencies, and this did not disturb any other body cells. This is why Floyd needed my doctor brother to help him arrive at the proper medical protocol for using his technology. Additionally, if you note in the payroll expenses attachment of this email, a one-line item of expenditure is for AIDS-related materials in which Floyd and my doctor brother had a real interest. My doctor brother had an agreement with Floyd to build 3 medical interferometers which would all have a noble gas plasma inside them. I actually witnessed one of these devices in operation. At the end of the, approximately 20-inch long, tube-like structure you could feel a pulsing being emitted at the end of the tube onto whichever part of the body you wanted treated. My doctor brother had ordered 2 interferometers from Floyd which were about 4 feet long. 2. The vacuum triode amplifier energy device is probably the world's worst weapon. Floyd claimed that like Nikola Tesla, you could cause artificial earthquakes, besides destroying buildings. As I understood from people in the intelligence world, which we debriefed after we saw the device operate, 3 countries have what is called the Tesla cannon: Russia, America, and I never found out who the third country was. As mentioned earlier, this energy source is what disabled Floyd's VTA equipment over many months until he got his buffer built into his device. Further, this is why the federal government had such an interest in what we were doing with Floyd during the time we spent with him. 3. The device was an energy source for the home, could change negative energy to positive energy. It was also an energy source for the car and many other purposes. The cost of building one of these energy devices was only about US $200, incredible. Description of the VTA device: on the day that we finally got to see the device operating, My doctor brother and I had finally convinced my electronics brother to accompany us to Sherman Oaks, California to see the demonstration. My doctor brother and I had made all the preliminary trips to see Floyd minus our electronics brother because he was literally a doubting Thomas, being heavily involved in the electronics field and full of Maxwell's theories of electronics, etc. Yes, you could say that he was a traditional electronics person. But, for this reason, we needed my electronics brother to be our debunker in case the device was not what it was portrayed to be. We had one other witness, Gary, an associate of mine who was to bring in the venture capital funding if the device proved to be as good as claimed. The day when we witnessed the VTA device operating is a day which I shall never forget. To actually see a device working, which cost only $200 to make and which could create all the clean energy you would ever need, was awesome. I know I have been altered ever since knowing that such a device existed. Now for a brief description of the device. These are not exact measurements but only approximations. The device was on what I believe to be plexiglass, acrylic. Nothing was hidden. You could see everything, top and bottom through the plastic. The plexiglass structure was approximately 18 square. We were allowed to pick up the device and carry it around Floyd's living room so you could see that there were no other electrical connections to it. On top of the plexiglass case there were 3 toroidal coils wound with thin windings of varnished copper wire. There were 2 barium ferrite bar magnets, approximate 7 times 3 times 1/2. Present was a voltmeter which displayed 120 volts when the device was turned on. Also, there was an ampere meter which measured the electrical currents flowing when Floyd switched different things on and off during the demonstration. The items used for load demonstration included the burner part of the stove, a hair dryer, a fan, and 5 100-watt globe lights. The fascinating thing to me about the light demo was that the lights had a glow like the overhead lights in your kitchen, a very soft, cool appearance. Not the look of a traditional bright light bulb such as you have in your lamp on a traditional nightstand. I forgot to mention that the device was started by attaching a 9-volt battery which, I understand, started the magnetic flux in motion. Floyd would then connect the pigtail on the device and it would become just one circular energy unit. As Floyd put more load on the device, the ambient temperature around the device, coils, would start to get lower. Additionally, depending on how much load you added, the device would start to lose some of its weight and you then had levitation beginning to take place. I should note at this point that on one meeting with Floyd, his wife Rose, used some expletives when telling how one day, Floyd kept adding more and more load to the device and he almost brought down the apartment complex he lived in at Sherman Oaks. He turned off the equipment, went out on his patio and pretended that it was a California earthquake. His neighbors never did know what he had in his apartment. In this respect, I never did find out what the big piece of equipment was in his bedroom. It literally stretched from the ceiling to the floor. It was so heavy that the floor was bowed in and sunken and that big sucker had a growling noise when it was on. I never did find out what it was. It was big like some kind of transformer. The rest of the story, you are probably wondering what the article on Ron Brandt is about. It's a long story, but after I moved Ron and his laboratory all the way from the mouth of Zion's National Park to someplace Oregon to hide him out, he was using tachyon beams with his medical equipment and after only a couple of minutes the black helicopters would show up, so at my doctor brother's request I moved Ron to Oregon. At the time I thought Ron was a real flake because when I helped him forward his mail from a small town in southern Utah, he asked me how to spell the word electric so he could put in the full address of Brandt Electric. Further, Ron said he was only here on this earth until 2012, it was now 1987 to 88, and then he had to leave to go to another planet. I now wanted to shoot my doctor brother who got me into this whole moving Ron thing. My doctor brother told me that Ron had to move fast because Ron had told him that an earthquake was coming in the next few days, right? Well, guess what happened a few days later? The largest earthquake in many years in that particular location took place, and it even wiped out the hot springs at the resorts along the Virgin River, which runs through Zion's National Park and through the small town of Virgin where Ron lived. I since found out that Ron had invented earthquake equipment along with Philo T. Farnsworth's, inventor of television, grandson, and 6 months ahead, they had actually predicted the previous great earthquake in California, and their prediction was off by only 6 minutes. The government is insisting that they want the equipment, so that is one of the reasons for everyone hiding out. Now, why am I giving you all this preliminary information regarding Ron Brandt? Well, it seems that Ron has a magnet motor which weighs only 75 pounds and which can generate power equivalent to that of a 300 horsepower internal combustion engine. Also, the motor can be a retrofit in any existing car without the need to design a whole new car. This is the connection I will explain later regarding Ron, who could not even spell electric, and Floyd, who was placed third in all the inventions to ever come out of MIT. All I can say is wow. Events surrounding Floyd's death. I will now leave it up to you to decide whether or not Floyd died of natural causes or was taken out by some person, group, or some government. In the summer of 1994, my doctor brother suddenly passed out at one of our venture capital meetings and was rushed to the hospital. After an MRI of his head, it was discovered that he had a brain tumor, and it was of the worst kind, very fast growing. This seemed impossible, as my doctor brother had always monitored his body daily, as he did an occasional experiment on himself with certain medicines. By November 11, 1994, my doctor brother had died. He told us prior to death that they, whoever they were, had succeeded in placing the fastest growing cancer tumor into his brain. How? I have no idea. I never did find out. What is important to the free energy field was that my doctor brother was in daily contact with Floyd and his associates regarding the energy devices. I was not that important and basically only accompanied my doctor brother to meetings and kind of got lost in the woodwork. Intellectually, I really was not a threat to anyone. I was only there at meetings to help acquire venture capital. On the very day that my doctor brother died, my electronics brother and I were at the home of John, Floyd's associate from NASA, who for some strange reason had followed my brothers and I to our home city where we lived, bought a home and took up residence there. We did not complain, as he was our go-between with Floyd. But the move still seemed strange to me. The reason my electronics brother and I were with John is that John had arranged a conference call with Floyd and us, to see if there was a possibility for Floyd to make some type of energy device which could power the magnet motor that Ron Brandt had. My brothers and I had all the contractual rights to Ron's magnet motor, which could be used in any car. I thought to myself that now I can really find out how real Ron, who could not even spell electric, was when I matched him up with Floyd from MIT. I could not believe what I heard as Floyd and Ron conversed at the highest electronic levels. Who the hell is Ron? I thought. Floyd agreed that he would have no problem doing the prototype for Ron's magnet motor to power the car. Floyd mainly worked with my electronics brother on this project, as Floyd needed old vacuum tubes which my electronics brother had to acquire for the device, and my electronics brother was a real bench person, which Floyd seemed to favor over academic electrical engineers. During the spring of 1995, while Floyd was working on our energy device for the car, John, from NASA, and Floyd were elated that there was supposed to be an announcement from the White House regarding Floyd's vacuum triode amplifier energy device. It seems that Floyd was a past friend of Senator John Glenn, the former NASA astronaut, and he had given Glenn one of the energy devices. Unfortunately, Glenn gave the device to the Department of Energy, who, according to Floyd, passed the device on to General Motors. Floyd was furious, and as I understood, Floyd was then going to sue GM for $200 million. As far as I know, Floyd never got the device back. I will always remember the extreme disappointment on the faces of Floyd and John when they realized that the trip to Washington, D.C. for the announcement was not going to take place. In July 1995, Floyd let us know that the energy device was finished and we were to take possession of it. Floyd now lived in Desert Palms, California, and that is where we would pick it up. After much thought, we decided we better not board a plane with the device, as we were not sure of any magnetic effects on the instruments of the plane in having it transported. It was new technology which still had many questions to be answered. Instead, we decided to drive our car to Desert Palms and bring the device back ourselves. Floyd called us the day before we were to leave and asked us if he could keep the device for a couple of extra days. He said he had someone coming, I thought he said China, and wanted to show them the device. We said okay, we would plan to pick it up when he was done. A day later, at about 7 o'clock a.m. Pacific time, there was a frantic call from Floyd's wife Violet. Floyd's wife Rose had died and he had remarried, to my electronics brother's house. My electronics brother was not at home, and my sister-in-law, his wife, took the call from Violet. Violet was very traumatized when she told my sister-in-law that Floyd was dead. There was a lot of shouting going on in the background. The people who were there claimed they were from the FBI and that Floyd's equipment belonged to them. Rose was extremely confused with the death of Floyd and people she had never seen before taking all the equipment out of her house to waiting vans. She asked my sister-in-law what to do, and my sister-in-law had no idea, as she was not aware of what my brothers and I had going on. Violet also said that about 5 o'clock p.m. the previous night, two men whom she had never seen before, showed up to see Floyd. Floyd was with them for a period of time and then they left. At about 8 o'clock p.m., Floyd was having a cup of coffee when he fell out of the chair onto the floor. She called for an ambulance, and when they arrived they would not let her ride with them. Violet was 75 years old and didn't drive. About 20 minutes later the ambulance called back to Violet and told her they didn't think Floyd was going to make it. As I understand it, Floyd's body was cremated. How soon afterwards, I don't know. The end result for my brothers and I is that all of our energy equipment that Floyd made for us was taken. By whom? Who were the two men who met with Floyd a few hours before his death? Was anything put in Floyd's coffee by these men? Violet said she had never seen them before and they seemed strange. Why could Violet not go with her husband in the ambulance? I have seen it happen many times when family is allowed, especially where age is concerned. How did the FBI, if that is who they were, know that Floyd was dead and show up in the very early morning, about 6 o'clock a.m., just hours after he died late at night? You be the judge. All I know is that all of our energy devices, medical and car, magnet motor, are gone. Where are they and who are the ones responsible for taking them? Here are some of the known facts about Floyd's energy device. The invention is a unified field device and so combines both electromagnetic and gravitational effects in the same unit. For a tiny power input of just 0.31 milliwatt, the unit produces over 500 watts of output power, which is an energy gain of more than 1,500,000. The prototype has no moving parts, is about 6x6x4 in size and taps an inexhaustible source of energy. To date, up to 1 kilowatt of power has been produced in actual tests which required only tiny input power to make the device operate. Our normal day-to-day energy is positive energy. The energy produced by Floyd's device is negative energy, but in spite of this, it powers ordinary equipment, producing light and heat as normal. A device like this has to have a major impact on the world as we know it, because 1. It can be easily built. The components are quite ordinary and the cost of the materials in the demonstration prototype was only a few $100 and it was constructed in just a few hours, using simple tools and equipment. 2. The test results are so impressive that there can be no question of errors of measurement when the energy gain is of the order of 1,500,000 times. 3. It demonstrates with laboratory precision that the law of conservation of energy does not appear to apply during the operation of this device, which is something which most scientists have difficulty in accepting. The device has very high performance. When a 1 milliwatt 60 Hz sine wave is fed into it, the output powers 500 watts of standard mains voltage light bulbs, producing both heat and light. The device has a positive feedback loop, so its gain depends directly on the output load and the input power remains unchanged. So to increase the output power, all that is necessary is to connect extra light bulbs or equipment across the output. When a motor was connected in addition to the light bulbs, the motor ran perfectly well under load and the light bulbs remained as bright as ever. Because it is a cold electricity device, the wires feeding the load can be very much smaller in diameter than would be normal for the load, and these wires run cold at all times. When the power hits the resistance of the filaments of the light bulbs, it converts into conventional hot electricity, and the filaments perform in exactly the same way as they do when powered by hot electricity. In 1988, Floyd produced a paper which he considered to be very important. The following text is an attempt to reproduce the content, his highly mathematical style of presentation. If you are not into complicated mathematical presentations, then just move on past and don't worry about the following technical material, or alternatively, take a quick skim through it and don't bother with the maths. Floyd says, what is thought of as empty space actually contains almost everything in the universe. It is home to all kinds of invisible energy fields and is seething with all kinds of very real forces. Every kind of matter produces an energy field, and these energy fields interact with each other in many complicated ways, producing all sorts of additional effects. These energy fields are the stuff of space, or as it is sometimes described, the virtual vacuum. Space is packed full of all sorts of things, but because it does not contain air, we tend to think that there is nothing at all in it. Most people think that vacuum means without air, but when scientists speak of space as the vacuum, they do not mean that at all, and they use the word vacuum to describe, loosely speaking, the place which is between the stars and planets of the universe, and Floyd refers to that vast place as the vacuum, so please don't think that it has anything to do with air, as it definitely doesn't. Floyd says, we all think that we know what light is, but the reality is that a particle of light is nothing more than a large interference in the electromagnetic field. Unless it interacts with matter or with another field, any electromagnetic field would not be changed in any way by the vacuum. Electromagnetic fields are a fundamental part of the structure of the vacuum itself. The whole universe is permeated by a constant magnetic field. That field is made up of countless numbers of north and south pole magnets in a completely random scatter. Einstein has pointed out that energy equals mass times speed of light squared, which is one way of saying that energy and matter are interchangeable, or are two different faces of the same thing. The energy everywhere in the universe is so great that new particles of matter pop into existence and drop back into their energy form many trillions of times per second. Actually, they exist for such a very short time that calling them particles is not really appropriate, so perhaps virtual particles might be a better description. However, if we generate a moving magnetic field, it alters the random nature of this energy in the tiny part of the vacuum where we happen to be, and the vacuum energy becomes much less random and allows a very large amount of vacuum energy to be drawn into our equipment and do what we think of as useful work, producing heat and light, powering motors and vehicles, etc. This was proved in laboratory experiments during the week of June 19, 1988, and it is the underlying operating principle of my phase conjugated vacuum triode device. The energy produced by this device is negative energy, which is the reverse of the energy with which we are familiar. The spark caused by a short circuit in a negative energy system is excessively bright and cold, and it produces a barely audible hiss with no explosive force. Melting of wires does not occur, and this type of negative current passes through the human body with only the feeling of a chill. Wires which carry a lot of negative energy remain cool at all times, and so tiny wires can feed equipment with hundreds of watts of power. This has been demonstrated in the laboratory, and the source of energy is unlimited, as it is the virtual vacuum of space itself. The nature of space itself is the ability to accommodate energy. Consider for a moment the following illustration: a signal, energy, is transmitted from point A to point B, which are separated by a finite distance. Consider 3 periods of time. 1. The signal is launched from point A. 2. The signal resides in the space between point A and point B. 3. The signal arrives at point B. If 3 occurs simultaneously with 1, we say that the signal has traveled at infinite velocity. If that were the case, then the signal never resided in the intervening space and therefore there must be no space between point A and point B, and so both points A and B must be at the same location. For real space to exist between the 2 points, it is necessary that a signal moving between them has to get lost to both points, that is, out of touch with both points for a finite period of time. Now, we know that for real space to exist between 2 points, a signal passing between them has to move at a finite speed between them, and if it can't do that, then there can't be any space between them. If space can't accommodate a signal passing between 2 points, then it has no function and no reality. We are left then with the only real space, the home of the real and virtual vacuum, space which supports a finite, non-zero signal velocity. A similar argument applies to the impedance of space. A medium can only accommodate positive energy if the medium resists it to a reasonable degree. Neither an infinitely strong spring nor an infinitely weak spring can absorb energy by being compressed. Neither an infinitely large mass nor an infinitely small mass can absorb or accommodate energy imparted by a collision, and the same holds true for space. Energy cannot enter a space of zero impedance any more than a force can bear on a mass of zero magnitude. Similarly, energy could not enter space which has an infinite impedance. It follows therefore, that real space must have 1. Finite propagation velocity and 2. Finite impedance. Another way of looking at this is, instead of considering the actual speed of propagation of a signal through space, to consider the length of time t which it takes the signal to pass through that part of space. We can think of a section of space as being, say, 1 nanosecond wide if it takes a signal 1 nanosecond to traverse it. That is, the energy or signal entering that part of space, leaves it again 1 nanosecond later. Signal propagation speed in the space in which we live is at the speed of light. General description of energy transfer: consider energy flowing straight and level down a transmission line. The energy does not know the width of the channel through which it is passing. If the energy flow reaches a point where the conductivity of the channel lowers but the size and shape of the channel remain the same, then not as much energy can flow and some gets reflected back along the channel. The energy current will not know if a. the conductivity has changed, or b. the geometry has changed. The energy current can change direction very easily, and so as far as it is concerned, the change caused by a. is equivalent to the change caused by b. The channel through which the energy flows has width and height, and the width divided by the height is called the aspect ratio of the channel. Energy current has an aspect ratio, and if that aspect ratio is forced to change, then some of the flowing energy will reflect so as to keep the overall aspect ratio unchanged. The aspect ratio of energy current is much like the aspect ratio of space itself. While the aspect ratio of space itself can change, its fundamental velocity of c, the speed of light in space, can't really change. That speed is just our way of visualizing time delay when energy resides in a region of space. Uniform space has only two parameters. 1. Aspect ratio, and 2. Time delay. Aspect ratio defines the shape, but not the magnitude, of any energy flow which enters a given region of space. Velocity or length define the time during which that energy can be accommodated in a region of space. The conduct part of space through which the energy wave passes. B divided by A is the aspect ratio of that part of space. Energy wave flows in at velocity c. Does an energy flow travel unimpeded through an interface, or does a large part of it get reflected? Space has quiet zones through which energy glides virtually unreflected. It also has noisy zones where the energy current becomes incoherent, bounces around and splits apart. These noisy zones in space either have rapidly changing geometry or rapidly changing impedance. Electromagnetic energy, the rate of flow of energy through a surface, can be calculated using E, the electric field, and h the magnetic field intensity. The energy flow through space is Exh per unit area, of its conduit's cross-sectional area, and the energy density is Exh/c, where c is the speed of light in space. If there happen to be two signals of exactly the same strength, passing through each other in opposite directions in such a way that their h fields cancel out, then if each has a strength of E/2 and H/2, the energy density will be Exh/2c, and it will have the appearance of a steady E field. In the same way, if the E fields cancel out, the result will appear to be a steady H field. Modern physics is based on the faulty assumption that electromagnetics contains two kinds of energy, electric and magnetic. This leads to the Baroque view of physical reality. Under that view, energy seems to be associated with the square of the field intensity, rather than a more reasonable view that it is directly to the field intensity. It is worth remembering that neither Einstein nor most modern physicists were, or are, familiar with the concept of energy current described here. However, their work still survives by ignoring the energy current concept. Scalar electromagnetics, the works of Tom Bearden, Kaluza Klein and others who dispute Heaviside's interpretations of Maxwell's equations. The fallacy of displacement current. Conventional electromagnetic theory proposes that when an electric current flows down a wire into a capacitor, it spreads out across the plate, producing an electric charge on the plate, which in turn leads to an electric field between the plates of the capacitor. The valuable concept of continuity is then retained by postulating a displacement current after Maxwell. This current is a manipulation of the electric field E between the plates of the capacitor, the field having the characteristics of electric current, thus completing the flow of electricity in the circuit. This approach allows Kirchhoff's laws and other valuable concepts to be retained, even though superficially, it appears that at the capacitor there is a break in the continuous flow of electric current. The flaw in this model appears when we notice that the current entered the capacitor at only one point on the capacitor plate. We are then left with the major difficulty of explaining how the electric charge flowing down the wire suddenly distributes itself uniformly across the entire capacitor plate at a velocity in excess of the speed of light. This paradoxical situation is created by a flaw in the basic model. Work in high-speed logic carried out by Ivor Catt has shown that the model of lumped capacitance is faulty and displacement current is an artifact of the faulty model. Since any capacitor behaves in a similar way to a transmission line, it is no more necessary to postulate a displacement current for the capacitor than it is necessary to do so for a transmission line. The removal of displacement current from electromagnetic theory has been based on arguments which are independent of the classic dispute over whether the electric current causes the electromagnetic field or vice versa. The motional E field, of all of the known fields, electric, magnetic, gravitational and motional E field, the only ones incapable of being shielded against are the induced motional E field and the gravitational field. The nature of the motionally induced electric field is quite unique. In order to understand it more fully, we must start by discarding a few misleading ideas. When magnetic flux is moved perpendicularly across a conductor, an electromotive force, EMF, is electromagnetically induced within the conductor. Within is a phrase which comes from the common idea of comparing the flow of electric current within a wire to the flow of water in a pipe. This is a most misleading comparison. The true phenomenon taking place has little been thought of as involving the production of a spatially distributed electric field. We can see that the model's origins are likely to have arising from the operation called flux cutting, which is a most misleading term. A better term, time-varying flux modulation, does not imply any separation of lines of flux. Truly, lines of flux always form closed loops and are expressed mathematically as line integrals. It is a fallacy to use the term cutting, which implies time-varying separation, which does not in fact ever occur. A motionally induced E field is actually created within the space occupied by the moving magnetic flux described above. The field is there whether or not a conductor is present in the space. In terms of a definition, we can say that when magnetic flux of vector intensity b bar is moved across a region of space with vector velocity v bar, an electromagnetically induced electric field vector Bxv appears in the space at right angles to both B bar and V bar. Therefore, E equal B bar x V bar. It is this field which is related to gravity and which is virtually unshieldable. This field may be called the motional E field. According to Tom Bearden, it seems that the charged particles in the atom act like tiny magnets and their motion in the space surrounding the atom would create this motional E field. The fields created by both the positive and negative charges would cancel to some degree, but due to the high orbital velocity of the negative electron relative to that of the positive proton, the induced field of the electron would dominate the resulting field. The field produced as a result of these charges would vary in proportion to the inverse square of the distance as gravity does. The field produced by the translational motion of the charges would vary inversely as the cube of distance. This concept totally unites the electromagnetic and gravitational field theories and accounts for the strong and weak force within the atom. Field superposition and the vacuum triode, electromagnetic induction with no measurable magnetic field is not new. It is well known that in the space surrounding a properly wound toroidal coil, there is no magnetic field. This is due to the superposition of the fields. However, when alternating current is surging through a transformer, an electric field surrounds it. When we apply the principle of superposition to the vacuum triode, it becomes more obvious how the device is operating. The principle of superposition states that in order to calculate the resultant intensity of superimposed fields, each field must be dealt with individually as though the others were not present. The resultant is produced by the vector addition of each of the fields considered on its own. Consider for a moment the construction of the triode, which includes two bifilar coils located within the fields of two conditioned magnets. When the current in one half of the conductors in the coils, that is, just one strand of the twin windings in each coil, is increasing, both the current and the magnetic field follow the right-hand rule. The resulting motional E field would be vertical to both and directed inwards. At the same time, the current in the other strand of each winding is decreasing and both the current and the magnetic field also follow the right-hand rule. The resulting motional E field is again vertical to both, and directed inwards. So, the resultant combined field intensity is double the intensity produced by either one of the conductors considered on its own. Expressed mathematically, this is E equal Bxv plus Bxv, or E equal to Bxv 2, where E is the electric field intensity, B is the magnetic field intensity, and V is the electron drift velocity. Bxv, the first term in the equation, represents the flow of the magnetic field when the electrons are moving in one direction, while Bxv, the second term in the equation, defines the flow of the magnetic field when the electrons are moving in the other direction. This indicates that field intensity is directly proportional to the square of the current required by the load placed on the device. This is due to its proportional relationship with the virtual value of the magnetic field, which theory states is proportional to the current. Electrometer readings were always close to parabolic, indicating that the source was of infinite capacity. It was further determined through experiment that the magnetic field does not change with temperature. Also, there is no reason yet identified, which would lead one to believe that electron drift velocity changes. It has been found remarkable that the vacuum triode runs approximately 200 F below ambient. Induced electromotive force, positive energy, when an EMF, electromotive force, is applied to a closed metallic circuit, current flows. The EMF along a closed path C in space is defined as the work per unit charge, that is, W/Q, done by the electromagnetic fields on a small test charge moved along path C. Since work is the line integral of force, F, the work per unit charge is the line integral of force per unit charge, in newtons per coulomb. We have the scalar product, F/Q, x dt dl is the product of F/Q, x cos x dl, where denotes the angle between the vectors F/Q and dl. The electric force per unit charge is the electric field intensity, E, in volts per meter. The magnetic force per unit charge is Vxb, where V denotes the velocity of the test charge in meters per second and B denotes the magnetic flux density in Webers per meter squared. In terms of the smaller angle between V and B, the cross product of V and B is a vector having the magnitude Vepsin. The direction of vector Vxb is at right angles to the plane which contains vectors V and B in accordance with the right-hand rule, that is, Vxb is in the direction of the thumb while the fingers curl through the angle from V towards B. Since the total force per unit charge is E plus Vb, the total EMF in terms of the fields is. It appears from equation 4, that the EMF depends on the forward velocity with which the test charge moves along the path C. This, however, is not the case. If V and dl in equation 4 have the same direction, then their associated scalar product is 0. So, only the component of V which is not aligned with dl, that is, with equal 0, can contribute to the EMF. This component has value only if the differential path length dl has a sideways motion. So, V in equation 4 represents the sideways motion of dl, if there is any. The fields E and B in equation 4 could well be represented as functions of time as well as functions of the space coordinates. In addition, the velocity v of each differential path length dl may vary with time. However, equation 4 correctly expresses the EMF or voltage drop along path C as a function of time. That component of the EMF consisting of the line integral Vxb is the motional E field, since it has value only when path C is moving through a magnetic field, traversing lines of magnetic flux. For stationary paths, there is no motional E field and the voltage drop is simply the integral of the electric field E. Devices which separate charges generate EMFs, and a familiar example of this is a battery which utilizes chemical forces to separate charge. Other examples include the heating of a thermocouple, exposure of a photovoltaic cell to incident light, or the rubbing together of different material to produce electrostatic charge separation. Electric fields are also produced by time-varying magnetic fields. This principle is already exploited extensively in the production of electrical power by the utility companies. The line integral of electric field intensity E around any closed path C equals d/dt, where represents the magnetic flux over any surface S having the closed path C as its contour. The positive side of the surface S and the direction of the line integral around contour C are related by the right-hand rule. The curled fingers are oriented so as to point around a loop in the direction of integration, and the extended thumb points out the positive side of the surface S. The magnetic flux is the surface integral of magnetic flux density B as shown here. In equation 5, the vector differential surface ds has an area of ds, and in direction, it is perpendicular to the plane of ds, projecting out of the positive side of that surface. The partial time derivative of f is defined as. This is referred to as the magnetic current through surface S. For a moving surface S, the limits of the surface integral in equation 6 are functions of time, but the equation still applies. It is important to clarify at this point that when we evaluate the value of d/dt over a surface which is moving in proximity to magnetic field activity, we treat the surface as though it were stationary for the instant under consideration. The partial time derivative of is the time rate of change of flux through surface S, due only to the changing magnetic field density B. Any increase of due to the motion of the surface in the B field is not included in that calculation. Continuing this discussion leads us to note that an electric field must be present in any region containing a time-varying magnetic field. This is shown by the following equation. In this equation, is the magnetic flux in Webers out of the positive side of any surface having path C as its contour. Combining equations 7 and 4, we are able to calculate the EMF about a closed path C as shown here. Or in another form. So, the EMF around a closed path consists in general of two components. The component d/dt is the variational EMF, and the second component is the motional E field. In equation 9, Vxb, dl can, by means of a vector identity, be replaced with Bx, Vx dl, a. V is the sideways velocity of d, the vector Vx dl has magnitude v dl and a direction normal to the surface ds swept out by the moving length dl in time dt. Letting Bn denote the component of B normal to this area, we can see that the quantity, Bx, Vx dl, becomes, Bn v dl, and equation 9 can be rewritten as. Clearly, the integral of Bnv around the closed contour C with sideways velocity of magnitude v for each length dl traversed, is simply the time rate of change of the magnetic flux through the surface bounded by C. This change is directly due to the passage of path C through lines of magnetic flux. Hence, the complete expression for EMF in equation 10 is the time rate of change of the magnetic flux over any surface S, bounded by the closed path C, due to the changing magnetic field and the movement of the path through the magnetic field. Equation 10 may be written. Note, the distinction between equations 7 and 11 is that equation 7 contains only the variational EMF, while equation 11 is the sum of the variational and motional EMF values. In equation 7, the partial time derivative of magnetic flux is the rate of flux change due only to the time-varying magnetic field, while equation 11 includes the total time derivative of the rate of flux change due to the time-varying magnetic field and path C's passage through the magnetic field. If the closed path C is not passing through lines of magnetic flux, then equation 7 and equation 11 are equivalent. It is also important to point out that d/dt in equation 11 does not necessarily mean the total time rate of change of the flux over the surface S. For example, the flux over surface S is bounded by the closed contour C of the left portion of the electric circuit shown in Fig. 1. Rotation. Iron cylinder. Copper ring. Sliding contact. Current generator produces steady magnetic flux in an iron cylinder which rotates as the wire is pulled at point A. The flux is changing as the coil is unwound by the rotation of the cylinder, as illustrated. However, since B is static, there is no variational EMF, and since the conductors are not modulating lines of flux, there is no motional EMF. Thus, d/dt in equation 11 is 0, even though the flux is changing with time. Note that d/dt was defined as representing the right-hand part of the expression in equation 10, and d/dt must not be interpreted more broadly than that. In the application of the present equations, it is required that all flux densities and movements are referred to a single, specified coordinate system. In particular, the velocities will all be with respect to the system alone and not interpreted as relative velocities between conductors or moving lines of flux. The coordinate system is selected arbitrarily and the magnitudes of variational and motional fields depend upon the selection. Example 1. A fundamental electric generator is shown in Figure 2. The parallel, stationary conductors, separated by distance L, have a stationary voltmeter connected across them. The circuit is completed by a moving conductor connected to the parallel conductors by means of two sliding contacts. This conductor is connected at y = 0 at time t = 0, and it moves to the right at a constant velocity v = v. The applied flux B is represented by dots on Fig 2 and has a magnitude of B = bo cos B cos jut x. The unit vectors in the direction of the coordinate axes are x, I and az respectively. Solution: let S denote the plane rectangular surface bounded by the closed electric circuit, with a positive side selected as the side facing U. The counterclockwise EMF around the circuit is d/dt, with signifying the magnetic flux out of the positive side of S, as ds = 1 dx. The scalar product Bx ds is bo L cos B, cos jut dy, integrating from y = 0 to y = y gives. With y1 denoting the instantaneous y position of the moving wire. The counterclockwise EMF is found by replacing y with Vt and evaluating d/dt. The result is the variational, transformer, component is determined with the aid of equation 12, and is WBBOL/sin by sin where y equal vermont. This is the first component on the right-hand side of equation 13. Note, y1 was treated as a constant when evaluating the partial time derivative of f. The motional E field is the line integral of Vxb along the path of the moving conductor. As Vxb is, bo v goes by 1 cosjut x and as dl is dozen x, evaluation of the integral, bo v goes by 1 cosjut dozen from z equal 0 to z equal 1 results in a motional E field of, bol cos bv1 cosjut. This component results from modulation of the lines of flux by the moving conductor. If the voltmeter draws no current, there can be no electromagnetic force on the free electrons of the wire. Therefore, the EMF along the path of the metal conductors including the moving conductor, is 0. Example 2. Suppose the conductor with the sliding taps is stationary, V equals 0, and it is located at y equal y1. Also, suppose that the magnetic field B is produced by a system of moving conductors which are not shown in Fig 2 and those conductors are traveling with a constant velocity V equal v. At time t equals 0, the magnetic field B is both sin by x. Determine the voltage across the voltmeter. Solution: there is no motional E field because the conductors in Fig 2 are at rest, stationary, with respect to our selected coordinate system. However, the magnetic field at points fixed with respect to the coordinate system is changing with time and as a result, there is a variational EMF. Since the B field at time t equals 0 is both sin by x and has a velocity of v equal v, it can be calculated that the B field as a function of time is b a sin b, yvt, x. This is verified by noting that an observer located at time t equals 0 who is traveling at the constant velocity, v equal v, of the moving current, would have a y coordinate of y equal y plus vt and an accordingly different expression for B. He would observe a constant field where the magnetic current density is. The counterclockwise EMF can be arrived at by taking the negative of an integral of the above expression for the rectangular surface bounded by the electric circuit with the positive side facing U, with the limits of 0 and y. The resulting EMF equals, which is the voltage across the meter. Induced motional field, negative energy. Conventional theory says that electric fields and magnetic fields are different things. Consider for a moment, a charge with an electric field around it. If the charge is moved, then a magnetic field develops and the moving charge constitutes a current. If an observer were to move along with the charge, then he would see no relative motion, no current and no magnetic field. A stationary observer would see motion, current and a magnetic field. It would appear that a magnetic field is an electric field observed from a motional reference frame. Similarly, if we take a mass with a gravity field around it, and we move the mass and create a mass current, a new field is also created. It is a different kind of gravity field with no source and no sink. It is called the rotational field and is also known as the Lenz-Thirring effect. This field and its governing principles will form the basis for future anti-gravitational devices, see figures 1 to 4. Within the confined R of the vacuum triode box, the space-time continuum is reversed by the fields which are produced in the presence of excited coherent space flux quanta. These quanta have been attracted from, and ultimately extracted from the virtual vacuum, the infinitely non-exhaustible diaxy. For a more detailed mathematical format see Tom Bearden's paper The Phase Conjugate Vacuum Triode, April 23, 1987. Much of the theory which likely applies to the vacuum triode has been developed in the field of phase conjugate optics. With regards to overunity phenomena, it is important to note that so long as positive energy is present in a positively flowing time regime, then unity and overunity power gains are not possible. The summation of the losses due to resistance, impedance, friction, magnetic hysteresis, eddy currents and windage losses of rotating machinery will always reduce overall efficiency below unity for a closed system. The laws of conservation of energy always apply to all systems. However, the induced motional E field changes the system upon which those laws need to be applied. Since the vacuum triode operates in more than 4 dimensions and provides a link between the multidimensional reality of the quantum state and the Dirac sea, we are now dealing with an open-ended system and not the closed system within which all conservation and thermodynamic laws were developed. To achieve unity, the summation of all magnetic and ohmic losses must equal 0. To achieve this state, negative energy and negative time need to be created. When this is achieved, all ohmic resistance becomes 0 and all energy then flows along the outside of conductors in the form of a special space field. Negative energy is fully capable of lighting incandescent lights, running motors and performing all of the functions of positive energy tested to date. When run in parallel with positive energy, however, cancellation, annihilation, of opposing power types occurs. This has been fully tested in the laboratory. Once unity has been achieved and the gate to the Dirac sea opened, overunity is affected by loading the open gate more and more, which opens it further to the point where direct communication/interaction with the nucleus of the atom itself is achieved. Output of the vacuum triode is not proportional to the excitation input, as the output produced by the device is directly proportional to the load which is placed on it. That load is the only dependent variable for device output. The triode's output voltage and frequency always remains constant due to the conditioning of the motional E field in the permanent magnets and the small regulated excitation signal which is provided through a small oscillator. Regulation remains constant and the triode output looks into an in-phase condition, cos equal 1 var equal 1, under all load characteristics. The vacuum triode is a solid-state device consisting of conditioned permanent magnets capable of producing a motional field. This field opens the gate to the Dirac sea from where negative energy flows into the triode's receiving coils. The coils are wound with very small diameter wire, but in spite of that, they are capable of producing more than 5 kilowatts of useful power. This in itself is a clear indicator that the type of electrical energy collected by the device is not conventional electrical energy. The wire sizes used in the construction of the device would not be capable of carrying such large currents without excessive heat gain. However, the triode's coils actually run cooler when loaded at 5 kilowatts. The fundamental magnets have been broken free of the binding forces which constrain them to be steady-state single-pole uniform magnetic flux devices. They are now able to simply support mass, as demonstrated with the transformer steel illustration. They can now easily be made to adopt a dynamic motional field by applying a tiny amount of excitation. Specifically, 1 milliamp at 10 volts, 10 milliwatts, of excitation at 60 Hz enables the coils of the triode to receive from the Dirac sea more than 5,000 watts of usable negative energy. It has not yet been determined how much more energy can be safely removed.